Well, I see that we have hit 9:30 a.m., which is our start time for this legislative update. And so I want to welcome everyone to this opportunity to speak with at least two of our representatives in the legislature this session, Matt Pierce and Shelley Yoder, excuse me. And Shelley is, I'm sure, on her way. And since as an office holder, I was always known as the late Sonia Learcamp. I'm not going to be chiding Shelley for being a couple minutes late either. We want to welcome everyone to this legislative update that is sponsored by the League of Women Voters for Bloomington, Monroe County, Brown County, and Johnson County, and also by the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. We are so happy to bring this opportunity to you for you to meet with your legislators and have them answer your questions personally. We hope that during this session that you will mute your audio so that we don't get any background noises or conversations. If you have a question for any one of the legislators, type into chat, direct it to one question moderator, and just write, "I have a question." And we have an individual moderating that, and we will put you in the queue to ask questions of the legislators. Then when you're called upon, you can unmute and ask your question. If I could have slide number 2. Okay, we want to make sure that everyone knows that all of the representatives for the areas that our leagues represent have been invited to participate in this legislative update. You can see their names and districts on this particular slide. At this time, only Shelley and Matt have agreed to participate. So we are so fortunate to have their wisdom and experience weigh in on the questions that we have about bills that are going through this session. And remember that this is an informative session. It's not a debate. We want everyone to remember to be civil and respectful. And I have to say, I've been doing this now for a couple, 3 years, and everyone has absolutely conformed to that request. These sessions have been informative and respectful on both sides. Each legislator will briefly summarize highlights and plans for this legislative session. They'll bring you up to date on where some of the legislation stands right now and where things are going. After the legislator remarks, then the participants can be asking questions or raise issues for the legislator to consider. And so while you're listening to the opening remarks, please be writing down some questions. Get prepared to participate in this because we want this to be very conversational. To ask a question again, just put in at one question moderator that you would like to ask a question, and then you will be called upon and asked to unmute when it is your turn. Each legislator will respond to each question that is asked in turn. There will be a time moderator so that we can get in as many questions as possible before our ending time of 11 a.m. And we also want to make sure everyone knows that the Community Access Television Services is recording this session, and it will be available to be watched after we are finished with this today. And you'll receive notification how to access that recording. So with all of that said, I think that we are ready to open up and Matt, let's start with you today, and you can do your opening remarks.
Okay, well, we're coming up upon the deadline to get all the bills out of the first house. So bills introduced in the House need to be passed out by the end of this week, or they're essentially dead unless they get revived in some other legislative vehicle. And the same thing over in the Senate. And so Monday is the last day for bills to get passed out of committee. That's also going to be the day when the House Ways and Means Committee considers the budget. So the governor introduced his budget and he zeroed out a lot of programs. And his argument was that those people should have to come in and basically fight to get their programs funded. So it's kind of like the old idea of zero-based budgeting. Like instead of assuming something continues and gets some kind of inflationary increase, let's just make everybody come in and prove that they still deserve to be funded. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the House Republicans do with their budget. And normally there's significant changes from a governor's proposed budget, which is the introduced version of House Bill 1001, the budget bill. So we'll have a little bit by the end of the day on Monday. Hopefully, we'll have a little better understanding of where the budget's going, at least from the House's perspective. Now, of course, that budget will get sent over to the Senate, and then the Senate will probably completely rewrite it as well. And then where things really come together is in the last few days of the session in April, when a final fiscal forecast comes in. We'll have some idea whether we'll have a little more money than anticipated or less money than anticipated. And then the majority party's negotiators will go somewhere and figure out how they want that budget to work. So this week will be interesting. We'll get a few clues, at least what the budget priorities are for the House Republicans. And so then the second reading deadline, so the deadline for bills to get past the second reading or amendment phase, where amendments can be offered to bills in the floor, that will be on Wednesday. And then Thursday is the deadline for third reading or final passage of bills out of the House. So if we get to the end of the day on Thursday, when the House adjourns, if a bill has not been passed out of the House, then that particular bill is dead for the session. So that also will give us a little bit of idea of what we're looking at. Now, this year, the Speaker of the House has moved to a little bit of a different schedule. And normally we'll be in session normally like Monday and Tuesday of the following week. And then usually there's like 3 days off after that. Well, the Speaker has decided to arrange the schedule so the week after this coming week, the legislature will be in recess for the entire week. So there's kind of like a halftime spring break built into the legislative session. And so nothing will be happening week after next. And then when the legislature comes back into session that following week, then each house will begin working on the other house's bills. So the Senate bills that were sent to the House will begin to see what's going to move in the House, and the same thing for House bills sent to the Senate. So things on the calendar already this week that are kind of of interest, or at least have caught my attention, and some of them you may have heard about in the media, is that House Bill 1006 deals with paying prosecutors, getting prosecutors some extra resources, among other things. But there's one provision in there that concerns me and caused me to vote against the bill, is they put a provision in that creates a panel of 5 prosecutors. And if a prosecutor makes a statement that he or she is not going to enforce a particular law, or they detect some pattern, I guess, in some way, they have some evidence that a prosecutor is choosing not to enforce a particular law, then that panel can investigate that. And if they determine that the prosecutor has kind of categorically excluded prosecution of certain laws, then that county would be denied additional funding that's in the bill to help pay for deputy prosecutors and other individuals. And so I'm a little bit concerned about that. I've been told that there's a provision in the Senate that would adopt the Florida system where the governor can simply remove prosecutors that the governor doesn't like. And I don't know if that bill's moving over there or not, but this has been a kind of an issue for 2 or 3 years. I think it got triggered by prosecutor Ryan Mears in Indianapolis, who announced that he was not going to be prosecuting marijuana possession on its own. He has prosecuted about 1,100 marijuana violations in conjunction with other violations. So, at any rate, they were really outraged about that and tried very hard to defeat him in the last election. They spent a lot of money going after him on that issue. And I think they shaved about 2% off his margin down to about 63%. So my argument is prosecutors are elected every 4 years. If their voters don't like the priorities or the way they're choosing to expend their resources, then they can be tossed out of office. There's no need to have state oversight or someone attempting to impose upon that prosecutor the state priorities. So we'll see what happens with that bill as it moves along. House Bill 1041 is deals with trans athletes. So you might know that in previous session, it was made illegal for trans athletes to participate in girls' sports at the high school level. This bill would now place that restriction on intercollegiate athletics. My understanding is the NCAA has already reversed itself and now adopted a rule that pretty much parallels this bill. So I don't know what practical effect it's really going to have, but that's moving along. House Bill 1230 would make school board elections partisan. Individuals would be required to run with the Republican or Democratic Party label, or there is a mechanism for them to declare themselves nonpartisan. And I've opposed that bill in the past. It has been introduced in the past and not become law, but it appears that this might be the year that it does. One of the things that really stuck in my mind is I happened to be on the elections committee the year this was first considered, and the author of the bill was presenting it. And I asked him what key piece of information did he think the voters were going to get from that party label R or D behind a school board candidate. And his response was they would know who was the moral candidate running in the election. So that kind of tells you where that particular issue is coming from. And so it looks like it's got some momentum. At least will be moving out of the House most likely. An interesting bill that actually is getting lots of infighting amongst the Republicans is House Bill 1493, which relates to regulation of towing services. So one of the Republican members has a bill that is attempting to provide some consumer protections as far as rates and operations of people who provide towing services, and particularly people who tow illegally parked vehicles and they end up in storage someplace. And so apparently there's a big contingent of towing operator supporters within the Republican caucus who've been kind of pushing back on the bill and wanting to offer a bunch of amendments to kind of water it down. And the author, I think, is trying to hold them off. But they had quite a discussion in their caucus, I understand. Their caucuses aren't open, so you just kind of have to hear the rumors. And that bill was not called down on second reading last week. So we'll see if it comes down as amended in some way, or whether there's not consensus within their caucus and the bill will just kind of die sitting on the calendar on second reading. One piece of good news, House Bill 1322 had a provision in it, which I thought was just quite honestly crazy, but it would have required the state pension funds to invest in Bitcoin. And, one of the most speculative, kind of ridiculous investment vehicles, even though now it's wildly up. So, it's kind of like gambling. If you get in at the right time, you get out at the right time. Yeah, you can really make a killing, but it's not really considered a stable kind of investment. There's always been a lot of fraud surrounding those types of, I don't know if you call them investment vehicle or currency or what you would call them. But at any rate, a Democrat, I think it was Ed Delaney, offered an amendment to remove that provision from the bill, and the author of the bill actually accepted it. So I think that the Republicans kind of came to their senses on that one and figured out that perhaps that was not the best way to go for pension management. And then finally, House Bill 1362 is on the calendar for final passage. That's Representative Hall's bill that would essentially make all annexations voluntary. It would kind of eliminate the remonstrance process, and if a city wanted to annex a particular um, neighborhood, they would have to go in and get 51% of the non-tax exempt property owners to basically sign a petition saying, yeah, we want to be annexed, or I believe 75% of the property owners with the assessed value within that area that wants to be annexed. And so that's going to be on third reading this week. And interestingly, I really haven't heard anything from at least local officials that do the annexation, or other people as well. So it's interesting. Now, my district is all completely within the city limits of the city of Bloomington. So all of my constituents already live within the city. They've been annexed, and they're there. So perhaps that's why I'm not hearing too much on it. But I just think it's interesting because in the past, when there have been attempts by the legislature to adjust the annexation rules, usually you hear from the local units of government pretty loudly about how they think that might impact their ability to grow their city over time. So we'll see what happens with that bill coming up this week.
Matt, thank you very much for those remarks. And Shelley, welcome to the legislative update. Would you like to give your opening remarks at this time?
Thank you for having me and the opening remarks. I appreciate listening to what's been happening over in the House. I would say since we last met up, I was trying to reflect on what has occurred and some things that we talked about a month ago and where those bills are. I recall we had a lengthy discussion about a pharmacy bill that would allow pharmacists to test and treat certain RSV, skin disorders, flu, strep, COVID, some others, and that bill received a hearing. It was what was on the agenda for this week, and the bill was called the Walmart bill because actually we were not approached by the pharmacists. We were approached by both Walmart and I believe Meijer stores to allow pharmacists to test and then treat on site. And we received enough pushback that the bill was held in committee and actually not even heard. So there was some success there. Lots of questions about that bill and not support among pharmacists. It was being pushed by what was called the Walmart bill, if that tells you anything. So that bill appears to be dead. I don't think it had, and maybe Representative Pierce can speak to this. I don't know if it has a sister bill in the House. I haven't heard that it got a hearing or if one was filed, but in the Senate, it is dead. The other bill that has received a lot of attention is Senate Bill 1, which is the property tax relief bill. And it was introduced as the #1 priority of the Senate Republicans, and it was the wishes of the governor. And it sort of sat out there, and then finally we heard it on seconds on Thursday. And that bill was really detrimental to our local governments. It provided property tax relief to homesteaders, but it was going to really buckle the ability for our school corporations, our local towns and counties to be able to fund. Some of them said that they didn't even think that they could continue to function, from public safety to public schools to law enforcement and fire. And the Republicans pulled back quite a bit, which I think has created tension with the Senate Republicans and the governor's office. The bill is providing 75% of the relief, which, as it turns out, isn't going to be much relief for property owners, nor is it going to be, no, but still detrimental to our local municipalities and school corporations. So I'm continuing to hear from them that even this amended bill is going to significantly disrupt services for for residents. So be on the lookout for Senate Bill 1. It is on thirds on Monday. I'm under the impression the bill was gutted and a new bill inserted, and we tried to amend it some on seconds, but there was no interest. I think they're just trying to get this bill through without much pomp and circumstance to keep the pushback as low as possible, but we will be hearing it on thirds. Looking at some of the horrible election bills that are filed right now, Senate Bill 10 did make it through and it's headed over to the House, but some of the others have been sitting in seconds, and I'm not sure what's happening with those election bills. So we'll have to wait and see Monday and Tuesday if we're going to hear those bills. The deadline to hear bills will be the calendar as Representative Pierce laid out. The deadline for hearing bills on seconds, first of the week, and then on thirds. We'll wrap up this week with any bill in the Senate that was filed that did not make it through will be considered a dead bill. And so we're kind of anticipating, we haven't heard what some of those election bills are going to do, or if perhaps it's so what we're thinking is they don't have enough support on their caucus side to get them through, and they're sort of sitting there on seconds to whip some of those votes. There is a very harmful bill to public schools, Senate Bill 518, which requires all schools to share referendum dollars. The bill was amended. It's still not good because it's not good for both our Richland Bean Blossom School Corporation and MCCSC, because the way the bill was amended was it would exempt those school corporations that students within that school corporation, if less than 100 students attend a charter school, then those school corporations would be exempt from the bill. But both MCCSC and RBB SC are non-exempt, so they would be impacted greatly by Senate Bill 518. And that bill is still on seconds, and we will probably hear that bill on Monday or Tuesday of this coming week. So look for that bill, Senate Bill 518. The other bill that has passed through since we last worked together was the prohibiting the teaching of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the programs or spending any funding on any state dollars spent to that would privilege any individual according to race, gender, I think ethnicity. Is Senate Bill 289. It did pass out of the Senate after about 3.5 hours of questioning from the Senate Democratic Caucus. And that bill is headed over to the House. I think that bill still needs a lot of debate. The question of whether or not our scholarships that we have created in the state to support students, underrepresented students who want to pursue certain vocations like teaching, to increase representation among for our Black students, supporting those individuals who who want to go into teaching. These are scholarships that were created from former legislators, members of the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus who have since passed away, and they created these scholarships to promote teaching. And those scholarships are in question of whether or not they can continue. And we didn't get any, of course they said, of course we'll make sure that they can, but the bill itself is written in such a way that would prohibit that. The students could use those dollars to go study in another state, but could not study in Indiana. So that's Senate Bill 289. A win that we had was in education. The Senate Democratic Caucus helped to defeat a bill in education, and that was the Civics Education Bill, Senate Bill 257, which would require the teaching of a national identity, prioritizing republicanism, limited government, and a free market. That we were able to kill in education, but still got a hearing. But we were able to make sure it didn't get out of education. Terrible bill, personally. And let's see here. I think those are all my notes for now. Oh, I wanted to just speak quickly about House Bill 1001, which is the budget bill. It is amended now as I am reading, and some things to look for. As we were anticipating, it is universal vouchers and zero increase for pre-K, and some pretty shocking numbers there that we're seeing. I haven't seen the school runs, so I've asked our fiscal analyst to do some school runs, but I haven't seen those yet. So if Representative Pierce has seen them, we haven't seen the bill. It's still over in the House, and I anticipate it will make its way over, and we won't hear it until the end, as Representative Pierce mentioned. But with that, I will say thank you and look forward to your questions.
Wow, lots of things going on. We really appreciate your oversight on those bills. We only have one person in the queue so far, so I hope while this person is asking her questions that you will all be thinking of questions you want to ask. Amy Oliver, would you like
Thanks,
to ask?
Sunny.
Sure.
Thank you for being here, Representative Pierce and Senator Yoder. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to hear from you. I'm a school board member in Brown County. I'm very worried about Senate Bill 1. I read the summary of the amendments, and please, if I'm reading this wrong, let me know. But it appears to me that it limits the ability of schools to have a referenda. It limits our ability and changes our ability to do general obligation bonds. And then I know our school corporation would lose somewhere between $2 to $3 million just in the property tax cuts. And that is obviously devastating to small school corporations like ours. What is it that we can do to try to fight back against that?
Thank you, Amy. I just jumped right in there as if I was going first.
That's okay, you are.
Amy, you're reading it exactly right. No, as I was saying, even the original bill as filed was, it almost took your breath away. If you care about your community, about envisioning what your community actually is going to look like in 2 years with the amount of funding gone. They did amend it, and they are, honestly, I don't think anybody's proud of this bill. I really don't. It actually doesn't provide much relief for property tax owners, which is what they were saying they were doing. And it's going to continue to really harm our small towns, like as you were saying, our small school corporations, our big school corporations, but it's the ones like Brown County schools that feel it more. And yes, those limiting the referendum and those little details of Senate Bill 1 that get lost in just the discussion about property tax. So thank you for bringing those up. What can you do? I think the thing to do is to continue to push back, continue to write your legislators. The good news is it's going over to the House, and quite honestly, now the House can, the House R's and the Senate R's, they can sort of play this bad cop, good cop, and play this out. And currently, the way it left the Senate, it was an argument with the Senate R's and the governor's office. But now it's going to go over to the House, and I would encourage everyone to organize and mobilize around fighting this Senate Bill 1 and trying to defeat it over in the House, amending it significantly. Maybe when Representative Pierce answers this question, he can bring some insight. I mean, it's going to be on thirds. What day is today? Saturday. So it'll be on thirds on Monday or Tuesday. And it has to be on third. We have to get it out of the Senate if it's going to survive. Well, we don't have to. We could defeat it in the Senate, and we will try to argue that point, but it probably will pass. I think the Senate R's feel a great deal of pressure to pass something because they all ran on it, and here they are. The dog has caught the car, and now what are they going to do? But I'm going to kick it over to Representative Pierce to find out what he's hearing about Senate Bill 1 on the House side, and if he's anticipating it changing significantly or not getting a hearing and just being folded into the budget bill, which is something that I'm hearing.
Thank you so much, Senator Yoder. Matt, would you like to respond at this time?
Yeah, I think that it's a little difficult to know exactly how it will play out, but that is one scenario. Something just ends up getting shoved in the budget bill at the last minute. I think that both Republicans in the House and the Senate feel there's a political imperative for them to produce something that they can point to as a property tax relief bill. Now, the governor kind of set the tone by essentially saying that it would not be bad to kind of force local units of government to have to tighten their belts, because then they would go in there and find all that waste, fraud, and abuse that's floating around local government, and I suppose the schools too. And so that I think has been kind of the governor's justification for doing more dramatic things that have greater impacts on the local units, is that, like, well, they've probably been living high off the hog for a long time, and somebody should come in and force them to have to, just like your average home, person sitting at their kitchen table, make their budget work and tighten their belts and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of been the rhetoric, I think, coming from the governor, which may have driven kind of the originally introduced bill, because the governor had some caps and rollbacks and some pretty dramatic stuff that he had proposed. I haven't really heard much talk about this issue yet in the House. I think they've been laying low and waiting to see what actually comes out of the Senate. One thing that gives me a little bit of heart is Representative Thompson, who's the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. In the past, he's been fairly sensitive to the necessity of local government being able to function. And so when he's done some property tax things in the past, he's done some temporary provisions. He's tried to give people relief as they're suffering from the sticker shock of the big assessment increases. But I haven't detected, at least yet, him being one of these people who really want to kind of like tighten down on the local units. And so I would expect there to be a little bit of a moderating effect there. One of the things that the people who really want to do a lot of limitations on property tax, which I'm sure property tax payers would appreciate, a lot of them, they just kind of say, well, if they don't have enough money from the property taxes to, do their police and fire and streets and all that kind of stuff, they got plenty of local option income taxes that they can raise, and, other things that they can do to get the money they need. And so I think that's a little bit interesting. While we have a lot of people on the state level talking about eliminating the income tax, and there are bills moving to over time reduce the income tax, they're basically telling the locals, well, if we tighten you down too hard on property taxes, you can just go raise your income tax, and that'll be your answer. So it's kind of up in the air on how all that is going to play out. But I would suspect that they're going to feel the need to adopt something that they can point to at the end of the session as having been, quote, property tax relief.
Thank you, Matt. I'm just going to make a little observation from my perspective, which is fairly limited. But it seems to me as if, number one, the bulk of our state is small communities that rely on the kind of monies that are being talked about for their schools and for their safety and things like that. And also, isn't it also true that Indiana has one of the lowest property tax rates already in the United States? And I know it's popular to say reduce taxes, but people need to be able to, the communities need to be able to survive. And I just don't understand any of what's going on now with reference to this demand for property tax relief when it's going to be so hurtful. Shelley, can you address that at all?
It's interesting if you look at the 2025 session, at least this first half in the Senate. The first few weeks, we argued having a resolution to change for term limits for congressional leaders. So me as a senator, not me, I mean, I didn't support it, but making a change to other people's jobs. And now we're finishing the session looking at local elected leaders impacting their ability to do their jobs. And we haven't addressed anything about the Senate and trying to impact the senators' ability to, to actually do their job. So I think that's an interesting perspective. We start by telling congressional leaders how to do their jobs, and we finish by telling local elected leaders how to do their jobs. It's frustrating, but I would agree with you, Sonia. I mean, it's easy to say you need to tighten your belt, you need to make those cuts. Many of our local governments run, they don't have a lot of money, and it is tight. Our local elected leaders, they don't make a lot of money. I mean, I didn't even talk about we passed, we're about to pass out of the Senate the partisan school boards bill, which does provide an increase to those who serve on the school board. It's small, but it's something. But there again, there is this big push to create more divisiveness in our communities. And I think the ramifications of Senate Bill 1 are going to create more divisiveness in our communities. And from what I'm seeing and reading and experiencing, we should be addressing how do we find ways to support our public safety, our local governments, lifting up Hoosiers. And the governor said it in his State of the State. Hoosier wages have not kept up. And when you see the support, I was reading the press release from the Republicans on the budget on House Bill 1001, and the pride of Senate Bill, House Bill 1001, and how Indiana is the top for economic development, of starting a business, having a business tax, top of all the, I guess, qualifiers that they're wanting to tout to say, look at how strong Indiana's economy is. And yet Hoosiers don't feel it. I mean, that's why we're having this conversation about property tax. It's because of how the property tax structure is that it's been difficult, the surprise and the increase for people who own their home. We're not even talking about renters, which I can get to in a second, but people who own their home, they saw the greatest increase. Then, so that would be, the 1%, but no, yes. Then we have three tax sort of brackets, but those for our business owners, they even saw a decrease. What happened? Sorry about that.
Yeah, you're still there.
Okay, good. Did I cut out though?
No, you didn't. Well, I didn't hear you
No, you were
finish your
there the whole
answer.
time.
Okay, good. Because my screen just went blank and I panicked for a second. But I would I'll just conclude by saying that if our state is so good for business, why are Hoosier families not feeling that in their pocketbooks? That's what I would ask. So what is up with that? And that is, I'm just quoting the governor in his State of the State. Hoosier wages have not kept up. And I think that Hoosiers are pushing back and saying, that's why we're having this conversation about property taxes. It's frustrating, but renters, we tried to have an amendment put in because Senate Bill 1 says nothing about any kind of tax credit for renters. And I know in Monroe County, we have so many Hoosiers who are renting. And so one of the things that we have prioritized as a caucus, the Senate Democratic Caucus, is trying to get some relief there for renters. And we're not done with that push, but it was it's aggravating when all the benefit is, for people who own homes, but we also have many Hoosiers who rent, and we need to make sure that they get relief as well.
Thank you, Shelley. Matt, I don't know if you wanted to address my editorial comments or not, but
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is true that if you look at kind of property tax burdens overall among the 50 states, we are pretty low. But when I talk to people, that's not really very comforting to them because, particularly for people who are on fixed income, like maybe you're just relying upon Social Security as the thing that keeps you going every month. If you have a dramatic increase in your property taxes because the assessed values went way up, and the system of tax caps that got put in the Constitution are tied to assessments. So if suddenly a big chunk comes out of your budget for property taxes, I mean, you have nowhere else to go to get that, to make that up. And then that really makes it difficult for you to pay your other bills and necessities. So I get that. And, there's an issue there to be dealt with. It's just that, kind of what Shelley's getting at is we've gotten to the point where, at least for the last decade, it seems like the only two metrics that are used to determine whether your state is progressing is how low are your taxes and how few regulations do you have. And they are losing track of just greater quality of life issues. I mean, do people have enough income to really live? Can they do the basic things that we kind of consider part of the American dream? Can you afford a down payment on a home? Can you afford the monthly mortgage? Can you save to send your kids to college? All these basic things have become very trying. And I think that was part of what happened in the last election. People are just like, we are frustrated that things that are supposed to be kind of just the standard part of the American dream are kind of out of our reach. And so the interesting thing to me, or maybe the frustrating thing is the better way to put it, is as I hear people at the State House kind of discuss these budget issues, and the budget does have to be balanced. We don't have the ability to print money or spend more than comes in. So I get that. But particularly when you talk about things like Medicaid, people's health care, ability to stay healthy, it's all just focused on the bottom line. It's as if they're not even people behind the numbers, right? And so it's just all about like, okay, how can we reduce these roles? How can we put in things that will filter people out? And how can we get to this bottom line? And it doesn't have to be that way. You could be asking yourself, what does our budget have to accomplish in order to advance the state to help individuals, to support families. And then you can ask yourself the second question is like, okay, is there a way we can get the revenue to do what we need to do? And that is not a discussion anymore. It's just a relentless, we got to cut taxes, we got to cut taxes. And the truth is, there have been billions of dollars of revenue have been given away or foregone over the last decade, and it's mostly gone to corporations and the wealthiest Hoosiers. And that was masked for the last 4 years because there was so much stimulus money from the federal government during COVID that we got a lot of sales tax revenue. The economy kind of got, heated up from that. And then additionally, the states were sent a lot of money by Washington to cope with the impacts of COVID. And so we were swimming in money for, the last two budget cycles. And so that kind of masked a lot of the revenue that has been foregone. And so there's just, it's not a discussion of, wow, if we really funded public health at the necessary level, look how we'd improve the quality of life of people. People would be healthy, less diabetes. Maybe we'd have more smoking cessation, less people with lung cancer, which then translate into that healthier workforce translates into better economic development. And so instead of looking at like, what do we have to do to advance the state? And then how can we find the resources to do those things that are necessary? That's not the discussion. The discussion is like, well, we got a certain amount of money here and we got to cut some more taxes. So we're going to have to live with less. So how do we just like make it all fit into the box? And because of that, we failed to do the things that are really necessary to advance the state. And I don't know when that kind of mindset will turn around.
Thank you very much for your comments, both of you. I appreciate it. And we do have a question. The next individual in line is Kathy Roundtree. Kathy, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you both for being here. I have a question about the changes in Senate Bill 2. I saw that Senate Bill 2 was amended so that the restriction of 36 months of lifetime coverage for people in the HIP 2 program was removed. And that was really encouraging. And I thought maybe that was a reflection of the amount of pushback that was mobilized against that bill, which could be encouraging for all of us to see what organizing can do. I just wondered if you had a comment on what took place and what do you think about how that happened? Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, I would say, believe it or not, I know sometimes it feels like no one is listening, but they do. And your efforts do matter. So that portion of the bill has been amended. However, there's still a cap of how many people can be on Medicaid. So that is still something that we need to continue working on. And the way the bill sits now is similar to what Georgia did. And Georgia entered a pretty significant lawsuit. And right now, only 9,000 people in Georgia are on Medicaid. That does not make Georgia, that doesn't mean that more people need access to healthcare, but it's been devastating to Georgians in over their changes in Medicaid, and they are just going through that now. So we'll be fighting it. It's going to be on seconds on Monday, and I'm filing some amendments to continue to address some of the other very I would say dangerous, disappointing aspects of Senate Bill 2. What's most, I think, what we should all be alerting our representatives and senators about, there's no real fiscal note on this bill. What is going to be the impact of the bill as written, as amended, on Indiana? There isn't one. And so one of my amendments that I'm filing is a timeline. If we're going to make cuts to Medicaid or change Medicaid, we first need an actual fiscal note on the impact of Indiana. Then, based on that research, we can then make some changes to Medicaid that is not going to harm Indiana. But right now we're making these changes without any information, only just an idea of what it should look like, a desire to take people off of Medicaid, but we don't know the kind of fiscal impact it would have by doing that on the state of Indiana. So if this is the wishes of the governor, which it is, Senate Bill 2 is a priority of the governor to increase, to address Medicaid spending. We've got 4 years. So let's slow this down. Let's get some information and make an informed decision on the changes that we're going to make in Medicaid. That we know that work requirements do not work. We've got working Hoosiers who just taking them off of Medicaid and telling them to go out and purchase their coverage on the marketplace. They can't afford the marketplace, and yet they earn just enough to not, under this bill, under the amended bill, not be eligible for Medicaid. And again, we have no information, no research, no fiscal analysis of what impact Senate Bill 2 is going to have on the state. So that's where we are, Kathy. And I will say, yes, continue to notify your senators and representatives and make a lot of noise, because we are far from finished on that bill.
Thank you, Shelley. Matt, did you want to address that issue at all? I know that it was directed to a Senate bill, but you might.
Yeah, I don't fully understand the dynamics over in the Senate because I'm not over there kind of seeing it firsthand, but I do know that the Senate fiscal leaders seem to be the most outspoken about the need to change the trajectory of the increases in Medicaid. And I think that's just the bottom line, I think, of the governor and the fiscal leaders that are in control at the state house is their number one imperative is to change the trajectory of Medicaid. They want to basically not have the program grow anymore, and they'd probably even love it if it didn't cost as much. And so consequently, everything is seen through that lens. So again, it's not an exercise of how do we ensure that everyone has access to affordable health care? How might we do that more efficiently, or is there a more innovative way to do it? How might we improve the situation? It's just a very bottom line. We have to limit this program. We don't want to spend any more than X on it. And so, if we have to have caps, hey, if we can create some requirements that cause people to fall off, like these work requirements, which are very expensive for the state to even implement and do all the bureaucracy needed for that. It's just all about getting people off the program. And that's what's driving it right now. And so it's only going to be a lot of pushback and people contact legislators and telling them their true life stories, like, I am on Medicaid because of X, Y, and Z. And if I get kicked off, this is what is going to, happen to me. Maybe I'm a diabetic and I won't be able to afford my insulin anymore. They're just having real life stories in front of legislators, I think, can have some impact, because right now it's not even about people. It's just about numbers on a page, and it's about the abstraction of a program that they need to limit. And so that's the dynamic that you got to really work to change. You got to make it all about the people who rely upon those programs to have healthcare.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have 4 people in the queue, so we're going to be moving right along with some additional questions. And Matt will be first to answer this next question. And Mary Coy, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Matt, I'm talking about House Bill 1662, authored by Michelle Davis. It's government, state and local policies on homelessness. Last I checked, it's still in committee. It's not a kind bill. What are your thoughts on it getting out of committee? Are you hearing stuff about it?
Let me just double check here. I'm looking at my bill actions here. I haven't heard much discussion about this bill, so I'd be a little bit surprised if it moved, but we don't have a couple days left. So it's in government and regulatory reform.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can just bring up the committee schedule, because literally we have one day left. And so if I can get the House committee schedule up here. All right, let me look for government and regulatory reform. And yep, it's on the calendar in committee for Monday. So it's got a hearing. We'll see if it actually gets a vote and passes out of committee, but that will be heard at 10:30 a.m. on Monday in room 156C of the State House. So it's getting in just under the wire.
Okay.
Sonia, can I comment?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I was waiting to see if Matt had anything else he wanted to say, but yes, I was going to ask you to, please.
So one thing, I mean, I've been in the Senate for all of 4 years and I'm in my 5th year. But one thing that has stood out is this pride that I hear from my Senate colleagues that we are not Washington. You know, Indiana, we are going to blaze our own trail. It's this libertarian streak. We don't even care what other states are doing. Definitely not California or New York, but we are going to find a way forward for Indiana. But this session, I mean, it is like Washington, D.C. light. And what we're hearing is this pressure to criminalize street homelessness. So if you have seen, there were several bills that were filed to criminalize street homelessness. And there are so many issues there. It's very complex. But one of the sort of first things that you have to say, well, where will these individuals go? If it's criminalized, they'll be sitting in our jails, and we already know that our jails are, bursting at the seams. So what I've been working on, I know that in our community, we've got some resources and not enough to address to address this population. Monroe County has about 320 homeless individuals every night. That is the average, and that's Monroe County. So other counties are really feeling this as well, and I appreciate. I'm looking at a sea of names here of people who care deeply about their community. You're on this call, and before we criminalize it, we need to find solutions on how we're going to provide wraparound services for these individuals. And we are failing in that regard. So I am concerned about Representative Davis's bill. I'm disappointed it's getting a hearing. We had a bill similar in local government, and I'm on local government, and we were able, actually, it didn't get out of local government on the Senate side, but we'll have to wait and see if this bill gets out. I would just say I'm working on the Senate side on an amendment to try to get some support for my district, for our community, for resources that will help in this area. Because if we're going to have an option of jail or what, we need more services to provide to those facing homelessness, who are experiencing homelessness, to be able to avoid putting them, but the only other option is jail. So that's what I'm focused on, because it does seem to be a priority that is coming from on high, from DC, from the Trump administration, to push the criminalization of homelessness. And I could use everybody's help on this. If this is something that you care about, let your representatives and senators know that if that is going to be the case, we absolutely need to provide some wraparound casework services for these individuals.
Senator Yoder, would you tell us what your Senate bill number is so we can follow and see if your amendments work out?
Well, it's going to be an amendment to the budget bill.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'll keep you posted on what I'm working on with Senator Mishler, who's the chair of appropriations, and having conversations with him about what we can do in our community to get money. If the state is going to criminalize it, then we need some support in our community to help those who are living or experiencing or risking homelessness, or are at risk for experiencing homelessness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Okay, we have the next person in the queue, and we will first address her question to Shelley. Julie Hardesty, would you unmute and ask Shelley your question?
Hi, thank you. Thank you both for being here. This might be a little bit of a backtrack, but a question came up for me when the SB1 discussion was going on. So regarding Senate Bill 1 and how it will impact supporting public schools. I mean, definitely seems useful for individuals to contact representatives to point that out and push back on that particular limiting factor in the bill. But is our school corporations able to kind of organize to campaign against SB1? Are they able to talk to each other and communicate up to the legislation about that problem with that bill?
I know that I'm hearing from superintendents and school board members, and I know that their association, they're working behind the scenes. I want to add that there is a level of fear on the part of some of these organizations and not speaking out, whether it is our state education, higher ed institutions like our IU's, Purdue's, Ball States. They are trying to do what they can behind the scenes because they do not want, they don't want to ruffle Trump's feathers or Braun's feathers or senators or Republicans. So, I mean, senators or House members are just trying to do what they can behind the scenes, which is difficult because then Hoosiers who aren't in administration in our schools, they are left wondering, is anybody saying anything? Because they're having to work, in the dark about some of this, so as to not receive more attacks from what feels, like they're already being attacked, but they know that they have to work on these issues behind the scenes. And I do know there is organization, they are pushing back, they are trying to educate, but again, there is a great deal of pressure coming down from the governor, who has the ability to provide more pressure in these spaces. So it's a real fine line that these organizations and our school corporations, our local governments have to walk. But I think what would be helpful is letting them know that you've got their back and that you support them pushing back. For example, I read the mayor of Carmel, who is a Republican, who came out strongly in opposition to Senate Bill 1, saying this is going to be detrimental to our quality of place. Well, what's hard about that is most communities are in Carmel. And yeah, you have access to a great deal of support for the city of Carmel. But some of our smaller communities, they can't make that much noise because they're working on a much smaller budget. Our school corporations the same. So let your school corporations know and your local communities know that you would like to see them to speak up. Let your chambers know. Please speak up. Please say something. Support our local schools. Support our local governments. If you are a member of the chamber, ask them to push back. I mean, if anything, the State House does listen to the Chamber of Commerce. I would like to see the state chamber be a little bit more aggressive, but everyone is sort of working the back channels, and that's what I'm seeing, and it's definitely what I'm sensing, whether it's hospitals or universities or local governments.
Thank you, Shelley. Matt, would you like to address that question?
Yeah, there are quite a few organizations that lobby on behalf of school. I mean, you have a school board association, there's a superintendent association, there's an urban school association, we have two teachers unions. So there are a lot of people on the scene. But as Shelley points out, I think they've got the subtle message that, you know, if you come in here and you raise a lot of hell in a committee and you tell us in front of all the media that, you know, we're doing horrible things, we're not going to be very pleased with that. And so I think that what's tending to happen in a lot of instances, and I see this in the energy area too, you will never see if a utility doesn't like something they're doing. Now, rarely do they do something a utility doesn't like to do, but every now and again they get into a fight over some nuanced, you know, regulation or something. They won't come out and confront them in front of the cameras at a committee hearing. They'll just have those discussions quietly behind the scenes. And so I think that what's probably happening is all of those organizations have been probably very clearly saying, look, this is going to be the negative impact on us. And they've been doing it behind the scenes in the hopes that they can get them to change course and without basically upsetting them. And so you tend to see that more and more at the State House now, where there's not much actual strife within committees. Because everybody is quietly doing stuff in the background, hoping they can get it taken care of that way. And that's particularly true for universities. They just, I mean, it has to be something pretty bad. I mean, Senate Bill 202, which had to deal with making people prove they were politically neutral or whatever when they to maintain their tenure. I mean, the universities did come out publicly and testify and say there's problems with this, but for the most part, they stay behind the scenes and they just develop these one-on-one relationships, and they hope that they can just go in and sit down in somebody's office and say, hey, this is why we would like this to be different, and hope they can get it. So that's why you don't see much going on in the public.
Thank you, Matt, for that answer. The next person in line is Tammy Smith. So Tammy, I would ask you to unmute and direct your question first to Matt Pierce.
Hi, Matt. I had a couple of questions, but I'm just going to pick one. So SB 523 has moved to the House. That's the school chaplain bill. And so it's been referred to the House. So then it goes through all the same processes, as I understand. Are you hearing anything about major support for that?
I am not hearing anything about that yet. I know that there's a similar provision, I think, in the last session, and it didn't make it through the process. And it's a little bit, I assume that's going to go to the Education Committee, but I don't, none of the Senate bills have been assigned yet to a committee. That'll probably happen at maybe just before we leave. They might do some bill lists of Senate bills, but it may wait until after that 1 week break I talked about. So until we kind of see which committee it goes to, and you know, we start to hear a little bit more discussion in the House about it, it's hard to know where it's going to go. It's just a little bit too early. I haven't, you know, we're mostly focused in on the House bills right now, and there hasn't been a whole lot of discussion about Senate bills. I'm sure there's a fair amount of support for that kind of provision within the House, because we have a lot of members who are very driven by their faith. They're really seeing things through the lens of their church affiliations, and you know, they have no reluctance about using the levers of government to basically impose the moral value system that conforms to their religious beliefs.
Okay, thank you.
Matt. Shelley, would you like to address that question?
I was so disappointed to see that bill again. Yeah, I mean, the fact it did get through the Senate, it's on its way over to the House. I'm kind of, I hate to say this, but I wouldn't doubt if it would get through the House this time. We were able to defeat it last year, but they keep saying it's just a May provision. It's just a May provision. I don't know, Matt. I think it's probably going to find its way to the governor's desk. I just didn't, last year we got Republicans on our side to fight this bill, and it was completely down party lines, which means to me there's not a big enough flag when it gets over to the House to have many roadblocks. So do what you can, but I usually am a hopeful person, but on that one, I think we're going to have to probably just support our our local school boards to not move in that direction and make it a local decision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Okay, the next individual in line is Chris Mino. If you would unmute and ask your question and direct it first to Shelley.
Sure, thank you. My question is about House Bill 1169, which started off looking good, access to birth control, and then it redefines birth control to not include things that actually are birth control. Why? Does this have legs?
Coming over to the Senate, I don't know if it has legs. I know that we're going to try to get it back to the original state of the bill, but let me give you a little history on this bill. This playing around with defining some birth control as acceptable in the state of Indiana and some not. This is not new, and we have been warning and letting legislators know that's the attempt here, is to define what birth control methods are going to be acceptable in Indiana, or even defined as birth control. And what has been taken out of this definition. So to give a little bit of background on this bill, this bill was about, it was such a shock. This bill was filed by Representative Jim Lucas out of Seymour, and it would expand access to birth control. I mean, I don't know why he's filing this bill, but he is not somebody who has been in this space, but he filed this bill to expand access instead of just saying if you're on Medicaid, you should have access to have your birth control covered by Medicaid. He expanded it to the definition of sort of federal poverty rates, which would allow more Hoosiers to have access to having their birth control covered by insurance. So it was a good bill. But then it got a hearing and it was completely gutted. And what it became was more of an education bill. Number one, it redefined birth control methods in Indiana, which in that definition, condoms were taken out as contraceptive measures. All IUDs, even implants, were taken out. And what remained were birth control pills and natural family planning and abstinence. I think those were the only three. And then the other really troublesome aspect of this amendment was to say that our local health departments cannot help schools teach sex ed. It would ban that. So this bill, which started out, we had a similar bill last year, which started out really good and then finished not really good. This bill does the same, started out really good, and now it's actually harmful. I mean, condoms, I got some success. We in Indiana Code are going to change sexually transmitted diseases to sexually transmitted infections, which is a little bit of a win, but still, I mean, condoms are critical in protecting Hoosiers, but they're now out of the this 1169 bill, and why pills made it in, I don't know, and we'll have to see. But I'll have to say, the Senate Health Committee actually did not hear any controversial bills. Well, I mean, they did, but not in the space of reproductive health care. So I'll have to see if the chair of the committee has an appetite for this bill the way it was written. But Representative Pierce, do you know what is happening? Where that even came from, and why would Representative King, whose amendment it was, leave out some of these really important birth control measures?
Well, first of all, let me say, so I looked up House Bill 1169. It did pass out of the Public Health Committee, but it was recommitted to Ways and Means, probably because they think it has a fiscal impact over $50,000. That happened on the 11th, which I think is Tuesday. I just looked at the Ways and Means calendar. It wasn't on for Thursday, and it's Monday's budget only. So I think it's dying. I think it's going to be dead in Ways and Means. I think they're just not going to mess with it. Now, as far as Representative King and just in general, again, going back to these people driven by their own personal faith, you have a lot of people who believe that certain forms of birth control are abortion, and of course, their religious faith does not believe in reproductive freedom. So that's that drives it, and this has been going on for a long time. I'd say probably at least 10, maybe 15 years ago, I had an amendment that copied a Vice Simpson amendment in the Senate, which simply amended the Medicaid statutes to simply state that birth control was not abortion. And it failed. It was rejected by the Republican majority. And so there are people who they pick and choose, and they believe there are certain forms of birth control that to them are just abortion. And so they think it should be banned along with everything else, or at a minimum, not supported in any way by the state. And so that battle will just continue to go on. But I think as this particular bill, looking at it here, unless I'm missing something that happened on Wednesday before this list was published, I think that bill is probably dead.
Thank you very much, Matt, and for both of you weighing in on that. I will direct everyone to the chat that Amy Oliver has added a note about that bill. But now I would call on Sue Tui to ask her question and direct it first to Matt. So Sue, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you both very much, and thank you to our host as well. So I'm interested in the bills related to higher education, but in education generally. I was following these very carefully until the last few weeks when I've had to devote my attention to federal funding cuts and NIH, NSF, the U.S. Department of Education. So I've lost track. There were a number that were going to impact significantly what we in higher education, but also K through 12, would be able to teach, our curriculum, monitoring those, and so on. And I wondered, what education bills do you think we should be now watching and advocating for?
Well, I haven't seen those particular bills moving in the House. So that's the good news. Unless there's something coming in just under the wire. It interests me because it seems like the more controversial bills, or the bills trying to get at these issues about what's taught in schools, or kind of the culture war issues, it seems like most of that stuff is starting out over in the Senate, and the House is the House has been kind of fixated on immigration stuff for their culture war activities, and so I haven't yet seen things come across. For example, DEI, the big one that all that stuff's happening in the Senate. We haven't dealt with it in the House yet, and so I think the Senate is kind of the locus of those bills for whatever reason.
Okay. Shelley, would you like to respond to Sue's question?
So some of the bills you should look out for that are that seem to have survived, well, are headed over to the House. This bill on instruction of human sexuality that will require posting posting in a conspicuous place on school corporations' websites for community members to see what's being taught in human sexuality. That's Senate Bill 442, and that survived. It was not along party lines, so that's always good to send the bill over and have a few R's against it. But that is Senate Bill 442, and yes, it is. So community members can see what's being taught in matters of human sexuality, which is probably needed if we're going to some of the other things that we're doing. It's probably helpful that they can actually get a little bit of education. Number one, and then the other one is Senate Bill 289, which is the prohibiting DEI and defunding all DEI measures. I don't know if you saw, but Ivy Tech has closed all of their DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion offices, diversity, equity, inclusion staff. These were the offices that ran all of their Heritage Month programming. For example, Black History Month, any of the speaker series that they would have, that's all now ended, and they had to I guess fire 21 individuals across the state whose jobs were to teach diversity, equity, and inclusion, not teach, but run programming in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have heard some rumors about IU closing some of that as well, maybe even as early as this week, but that's all. That was just rumors. But I do know Ivy Tech has ended their diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. But the funding bill, I think, will all pretty much come down to what happens in Senate Bill 1 in property taxes, as well as in House Bill 1001, the actual budget. So we'll be keeping an eye on both of those.
Thank you very much, Shelley. The last person in line is Rosemary Doherty. Rosemary, I would like to have you unmute and ask your questions directed first to Shelley, please.
Hello. Thanks everybody for doing this. I'm a real sort of newcomer. My main concern is excellence in education. I'm wondering if there's been discussion related to House Bill 1001 about evidence that shows that in many instances, these charter schools are failing. So I hate to see Indiana go all in on it. And I'm just wondering what we can do, just like Matt was talking about, looking at the big picture on healthcare. Who is looking at the big picture on education, and how can we advocate for that, and what bills should we specifically address, which is similar to the previous question, but a little bit different. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Shelley.
Well, welcome, Rosemary. Glad you hopped on. It does appear that I was looking over just briefly House Bill 1001, which is the budget. And as I said earlier, that we were anticipating universal school vouchers, which it does appear. Now that would be school vouchers that benefit private schools, private charters. The increase to and funding of these health saving, not health, education savings accounts. House Bill 1001 also has funding for these savings accounts for education, which is also concerning. But no, your concern is spot on, Rosemary. I mean, we're going to have to sort of see. I haven't actually read or seen the school runs, but on the impact of House Bill 1001 on our local schools, but I anticipate it's going to be detrimental. I mean, of course, I read the press release, and it's, you know, we're investing in education more than we ever have before. You know, we've heard this, you know, the same talking point, and yet that funding, that extra funding, prioritizes, well, definitely takes money away from our public schools and prioritizes the voucher and the charter schools across Indiana. So that's kind of where we are, and I will definitely keep an eye on it and do everything that I can to support our public schools, and specifically the corporations that are in my district.
Thank you, Shelley. Matt, would you like to respond?
Yeah, so the important thing to know is education policy is driven by ideology, not facts. So if you want to watch Indiana lawmakers this week on public broadcasting, their topic was education. Chairman Boehning, the House chair of the Education Committee, was on there, and he stated in the program that charter schools outperform traditional public schools. So even though there's a lot of other data that says that at best they do about the same as public schools. And then, you know, and we've had scandals about private schools, particularly virtual charter schools and all this stuff. Just, you know, and the need for more accountability doesn't penetrate. They firmly believe the Milton Friedman idea, and this is what's driven everything for a decade now, that if you inject free market principles into education, competition, and you allow parents to, you know, vote with their feet and go to whatever school they like, that will force the public schools to have to get better, because otherwise they'll lose all their customers. And so that's how this being completely driven. And they knew 10 years ago that if they stood up and said, we want to privatize our school, our education system, that people would have said, what, are you nuts? And it wouldn't have worked. So they started very deliberately, relentlessly incremental. So 10 years ago or so, the discussion was, gee, we've got some poor minority kids, particularly in Indianapolis, in some really bad schools. And if they were just from wealthy families, they could just use their money to pay to go to one of the very excellent private schools in Indianapolis. So as a matter of civil rights, we should give those poor minority kids the same rights as their rich families, which is very appealing. And so that was the first step. And so we said that if you're in a failing public school for at least a year, and, you know, by the metrics of the state, it's failing, then you would qualify to be able to take your tuition money and spend it at a private school. And then the next year, it's like, well, if the brothers or sisters, even if they're not in a failing school, they should be able to go to the same school as their kids. It'll be better for the parents. And then we expanded it out there. And then it's like, I got to take your special ed kids. And they just, every year, a little more, a little more, a little more. And this year will be the final capstone of complete universal vouchers. Any family of any income level will be subsidized if they want to do private school education. And I think that the next step will be, which has been kind of floated here and there, is to not fund public schools at all, but to have a system in which every parent just gets a check mailed to them and they're told, go buy some education wherever you would like to find it. And the funding will not even move directly to the public schools. They'll have to be out there scrambling to get those checks from the parents by getting them to say, yeah, I'll send my kid to the public school. So it's all ideology. It is not fact-based.
Thank you, Matt, for weighing in on that question. And we are coming up on the 11 o'clock, but I do want to give both of our legislators an opportunity to perhaps give some short closing remarks. And being the League of Women Voters as our primary focus does relate to voting and election processes. And I know Shelley talked a little bit about the fact that some of the voting bills are just horrendous, particularly the one wanting to eliminate state school ID for voting, reducing early voting to 14 days from 28, and the closed primaries. So if you have an opportunity, if you could maybe address some of those things in your final remarks, that might be appreciated too. We will start with Matt and to do the closing remarks.
Sorry, Sonia, tell me again what you'd like me to address. I kind of missed it. Sorry.
Sorry, no, that's okay. We were thinking in terms of some of the awful election bills. One eliminating state school student ID for voting purposes, and reducing early voting to 14 days, and also the whole closed primary bill that's going through. Some of those things, whether or not you might be able to talk with those about those in your final remarks. You muted yourself.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so it remains to be seen what will become of those, but I expect a bunch. I think that I've been hearing that the House Republican leadership is actually thinks that the open primary system is fine. I guess they don't feel threatened by the idea that a bunch of Democrats are going to invade the Republican primary and somehow, vote rhinos in the office or something. So I think there's a possibility that one could get derailed. But I think the things that go directly to, reducing the number of early voting. I know that Representative Wesco, who's the chair of the Education Committee, I've heard him say several times that he thinks that we should just have the old system where you have one day of voting for 12 hours and that's it, with some limited absentee voting. And so he's not he actually wants to constrict things. So I think he would be very open to that 14-day possibility. So we'll just have to see whether the leadership has a different idea. But the best I can say about all of that is that, obviously we have very low voter participation and we should be going the other direction and finding ways to make it as convenient as possible for people to get engaged and participate in voting. And unfortunately, we're going the other direction. And so, I'll do what I can to fight that. I would just say that, it can be very dispiriting at the State House at times, but you have to kind of keep fighting, or maybe a nicer word is working, for your policies and for the things you want. And occasionally you can have some small victories. And I think that, until the voters choose to give us a little different mix at the State House, we're probably not going to win on the really big kind of policy issues of the day. But, quite honestly, what I've been trying to do at the State House is just make sure that the majority party continues to respect the rights of the minority party. And so, for example, I thought last week that the majority party was using procedural rulings to basically prevent Democratic amendments from being debated and voted upon. And it got to the point where I felt it was so outrageous that you can appeal the ruling of the chair. And normally it's a fairly quiet, boring discussion about, how the rule's interpreted and what it really means. And then you have your vote and you move on. And I just decided that this was really out of control. And so during a debate on appealing a ruling of the chair, I basically went off on the majority. And I said, you're abusing your power now. You just don't want to vote on things. And I think my voice probably got higher than the rules of decorum, louder than the rules of decorum would call for. And I think I made a few people cranky. But the interesting thing was, for the rest of the week, the ruling stopped and our amendments were able to be offered and voted upon. And so I think this is the main, lesson, is you have to keep pushing back and you have to demand that the system work the way it's supposed to. And as long as that's happening, that's the important thing. And then, as a Democrat, I hope that perhaps there'll be better results from my perspective in future elections that will allow people to be up there that can put in to place different policies. But in the meantime, it's important for all of us to demand that all of our levels of government operate the way they're supposed to, with checks and balances, with respect for the rights of minorities, and all of that. And so that's what I'll be working on, as well as all the big policy issues of the day.
Thank you so much, Matt. Shelley, would you like to give your closing?
Sure. I opened this way, I'll close this way. Senate Bill 10, which is the school IDs, that's on its way to the House. So that did pass, and you can continue to advocate that bill, to oppose that bill, and to make sure that bill doesn't get a hearing. Senate Bill 201, which is the closed primary bill, has been hanging out on seconds, and it's now on deadline. So if we don't hear it, that bill will die. So if there's not an appetite over in the House, maybe the bill does die. It has, I don't know, like 7 amendments on it, and maybe they're just not up for the fight on the floor to take up so much time, but we'll see. Senate Bill 284 is the early voting bill to reduce the amount of time for early voting. It's still hanging out in seconds. The Senate Bill 355 is on moving municipal elections to even number of years. And that's no good. And it also is hanging out in seconds. So I'm not sure about those 3 bills, but we're hopeful maybe they'll die on seconds, but not sure. And I will finish with this. The Senate bill to make school board races partisan, that did make it out of seconds, and it will be on thirds on the floor in the Senate this coming week. When we heard that bill, I don't know how this, there's a general rule that you cannot fundraise during a budget year. Well, you're not supposed to fundraise when we're in session, but especially during a budget year, senators and representatives aren't allowed to fundraise. This was not fundraising, but my ears definitely perked up. The reason why this is Senate Bill 287, which is on thirds in the Senate this coming week, making school board races partisan. And one of the reasons why for the author of the bill defended it on the amendments was because the majority of donations go to Democrat candidates, or go to support candidates who appear to be Democrats. That it's just all on appearance. And I guess my question is, and what I'm trying to find some answer to, how is that not extortion? I mean, if you are saying we're going to file these bills and threaten you unless you give us equal amount of campaign contributions, you're going to have, take this as a warning, people out in the hallway, government affairs, whether that's higher education or healthcare folks. If you don't give us money, you're going to see really bad legislation coming your way. And that was basically said at the microphone, on the floor, in support of making school board races partisan. We will be hearing that bill on thirds. Would love to hear from all of you, or at least reach out to your legislators to make sure you know how you feel about making school board races partisan. But keep up the pressure on legislators to make your voices heard. It does make a difference. And I appreciate you being on this call. I appreciate hearing from all of you on these matters, and continue looking forward to working together to make sure that policy that gets sent to the governor's desk is policy that is going to improve the lives of Hoosiers and not harm them. So with that, I'll say thank you, and thank you for trusting me and giving me this opportunity to serve you in the state Senate.
I want to thank both Shelley and Matt for making themselves available for these legislative updates. And I want to thank everyone who participated in this Zoom activity. You show your interest and your commitment by remaining engaged, and that's really important, and much more important now than almost ever. Please make sure that you put on your calendar the March 8th legislative update and the April 19th legislative update so we can continue to watch the legislation as it goes through. You can also tune in to iga.in.gov to look up individual bills and follow their progress. Again, we want to thank not only the legislators and those of you who joined us, but also Community Access Television Services and our team members and sponsors, the Bloomington League, the Brown County League, the Johnson County League, and the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for being here today and for so actively taking part. We appreciate you.